B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Monday, October 19th, 2020. My mom, Mary Alice, would have been 97 today. And since she had my oldest brother on her 25th birthday, he's celebrating, and you can do the math if you care to. Well, this is in line with my thinking for the last few months. And I'm still not making any prediction about the outcome of November 3rd or whenever the national election is settled. But Trump has been barnstorming the country on that post-COVID high from the steroids and all the other drugs they gave him. And he is busy working hard to defeat himself. And I don't know what kind of advice Jared, the Crown Prince, and others in the White House give him, but he is following his own desperate instincts, which is to keep talking to his base, not to try to expand his appeal to those who are wobbly, who may have supported him 4 years ago, or even to try to win back people who voted for Hillary and are planning to vote for Biden this year. Nope, he is hunkered down on a strategy that all he has to do is keep feeding that base raw red meat. And it's going to miraculously give him a second term. And that calculation did work in 2016, largely because Hillary Clinton carried so much baggage. And as I've pointed out here, Joe Biden has been a politician a lot longer than Hillary Clinton. But people are willing to overlook that huge baggage car on his Amtrak Express from Wilmington to Washington. And it's largely because of Trump. And he keeps providing reminders for people about what a big asshole he is. And I think that it is going to seal the deal, at least I hope so, where enough people will say, I can't do that, or I can't do that again. And cracks are showing in his face paint, his war paint. Because even as he takes on 2 mob rallies a day, on many days now, he cannot help the narcissism that plays out as victimization, where he considers himself to be so great, a savior to America, that he can't imagine why voters are rejecting him. And so, at several stops over the weekend, including in Macon, Georgia, on Friday, he asked his loyal cult members, "Could you imagine if I lose? I'm not going to feel so good. Maybe I'll have to leave the country. I don't know." In Iowa, he said he's never coming back to the cornfields of Iowa if they don't rally around him and prop up his damaged, bruised ego. And he acknowledged that he's low on cash. They've announced a meager $55 million ad blitz over the next 15 days. And millions of people have already voted. So his, Giuliani-triggered October surprise about Hunter Biden and the laptop with the crack-smoking sex video, it landed too late. Because so many people have made up their minds, have already cast a ballot, either through early voting or by mail. And we're going to get into the real problems our election system is encountering, much of it stoked by Trump. So he raised $247 million in September. The Democrats, $383 million. And Trump said, I could raise more money. I would be the world's greatest fundraiser, but I just don't want to do it. And there's no mention of him chipping in from his reputed billions to fund his own campaign. That was one of his selling points in 2016. I don't need money from other people. I got so much of my own. And at one of the rallies here, this is Macon, he was musing, suburban women. I heard they like my policy, but they don't like my personality. They don't care about my personality. Oh, I said they don't care about my personality. They want to be safe. So that explains the whole law and order, and Biden's going to bulldoze the suburbs, and black people are going to move in massive numbers and ruin the idyll of 1950s white suburban America. And Trump is so out of touch, he doesn't know that that was OVER a long, long time ago. And Biden is leading Trump among suburban women in battleground states by 23 points. And that's what surfaces in these awkward comments from Trump. He fills himself up. He doesn't read briefings, but somebody comes in and rattles off the poll numbers, and he's very good at remembering that stuff. And at some point, maybe while he was at Walter Reed or, I don't know, it finally got through to him that he can lose. That all of his antics, saying that if I lose, it's a rigged election, the only way I lose is because of a rigged election. I think he's recognizing that that shit's not working. But I've been reminding you, my beloved listeners, for weeks now, that we have not yet seen bottom. And in Michigan, Trump held a mob rally at the Muskegon airport. He's doing this now. It's very pro forma. He only holds rallies at airports where he can fly in, use Air Force One as a power symbol, give a speech, and then hop on the plane and head to the next city to do the same number. But he did customize it for Michigan because he continued his attacks on its governor, that woman, Gretchen Whitmer. And this goes beyond just the casual insults of, calling Elizabeth Warren Pocahontas, or his other nicknames that he uses for people, Sleepy Joe. Because he keeps whipping up hatred for Gretchen Whitmer, saying that she's a failure, that she won't open up her state, she won't open up her schools. And he's not oblivious that she was the target of a militia group that is loyal to Trump for the most part, was planning to kidnap her, put her on trial, and execute her. This is not a joke. It's not a laughing matter. It's not a trivial distraction. And the governor went on Meet the Press Sunday and said it's incredibly disturbing that the President of the United States, 10 days after a plot to kidnap me, put me on trial, and execute me was uncovered, the President is at it again and inspiring and incentivizing and inciting this kind of domestic terrorism. It's wrong. It's got to end. It's dangerous not just for me and my family, but for public servants everywhere who are doing their jobs and trying to protect their fellow Americans. People of goodwill on both sides of the aisle need to step up and call this out and bring the heat down. This is the United States of America. We don't tolerate actions like he has given comfort to, and that's why we all have to be in this together. So he called her dishonest. He criticized state rules on the coronavirus. And he's got this episode in his mind that during the lockdown in the spring, Mr. Whitmer, and I don't even know the guy's name, but he went out on his boat when other people weren't allowed to. And I have friends and relatives in Michigan who were frustrated by the degree of the lockdown. A lot of people have second homes on a lake. They were not permitted to go to them, and they were banned from their boats during pretty lousy boating weather, I'll add, but still, it rankled some people. So Trump took credit for busting up the plot to kidnap and kill her. And he described it this way. They said she was threatened, and she blamed me. Hopefully you'll be sending her packing pretty soon. And then the crowd began a chant of lock her up. So on CNN Sunday, Laura Trump, the first, she's a daughter-in-law. She's married to the idiot son, Eric. She said, well, you know, my father-in-law was just having fun when he attacked Whitmer and responded to chants of lock her up. And his response from the podium was, lock 'em all up. Now, we are used to this kind of lowbrow behavior from this man. He is a boor, B-O-O-R. But even this is lower than that. And Laura Trump went on, the president wasn't doing anything, I don't think, to provoke people to threaten this woman at all. He was having fun at a Trump rally, and quite frankly, there are bigger issues than this right now for everyday Americans. He wasn't encouraging people to threaten this woman. That's ridiculous. And then she, of course, played the victim card. That's what a Trump does. Well, gosh, I would like to show people my social media and the threats made against me, made against my children. So be prepared for something even lower. I can't predict what it'll be, but it's out there. And I don't know who Jonathan Martin is. He's a reporter at the New York Times, and he published a political memo. And I think he gets it right. He says, in the week since Trump restarted in-person campaigning, he's continued to prove he's his own biggest impediment by drawing more attention to himself each day than to Biden. He's blurting out snippets of his inner monologue by musing about how embarrassing it would be to lose to Biden, how he'd never return to whatever state he happens to be in if its voters don't help re-elect him. He's highlighting his difficulties with key constituencies like women and older voters by wondering out loud why they've forsaken him, rather than offering a message to bring more of them back into his camp. And perhaps most damaging to him and other Republicans, he is further alienating these voters and others by continuing to minimize the pandemic and attacking women in positions of power. Then he cites what I just told you about, the Muskegon rally and his vitriol aimed at Governor Whitmer. Later in this report, Martin writes, nearly every event the president overwhelms his critique of the former vice president. With Republicans desperate to reframe the election as a choice on policy difference, Trump, with his outbursts, is effectively ensuring that the campaign remains a referendum on his conduct. That's what alarms GOP candidates and strategists who fear that even the Supreme Court nomination is no match for Trump's daily exercise in self-sabotage. And so this is what I meant when I lamented that the Democrats had promoted Joe Biden to be the top of the ticket this year. And I still don't believe that Joe Biden has created a groundswell for his ticket with Kamala Harris. This does appear to be the year that the failed strategy of the Democrats, which is just to say, look, I'm not as bad as fill in the blank with my Republican opponent's name. I think Trump has shown just how bad he is, and he's compounded that to the point that people really are saying, hey, Biden's got a pulse, and he's not Trump. I'll vote for him. And on Friday, we opened the podcast with some of the truthiness comments from a man I called two-faced, Senator Ben Sasse of Nebraska. I don't know why Trump doesn't call him sassy, but he calls him little. But there are other people who get little. Anyway, he also called him stupid and obnoxious, an embarrassment to the great state of Nebraska. But other than that, he said, he's just a wonderful guy. And as I said on Friday, what Ben Sasse said in criticism of Donald Trump is accurate. But he's two-faced because he is promoting Amy Coney Barrett and much of the rest of the Trump agenda. And he's trying to have it both ways because he's up for re-election. So's John Cornyn in Texas. He's finally and gently trying to separate himself from Trump. And just like I said about Trump and his antics, it's too late for these guys. Too many people have already voted, or at least already made up their minds about how they're going to vote. These desperate efforts to put some blue sky between their candidacies and the Trump machine, I think, are going to make things somewhat worse with some voters. So we now have a back and forth between Tony Fauci and Donnie Trump. And I got home late last night, so I didn't watch 60 Minutes. I've got it on the machine, so I'll check it out tonight. But Fauci gave an interview where he kind of relaxed some of his own self-control. He has been studiously avoiding getting into a spat with Trump. And I think he's given up. And while he doesn't get involved in political campaigns, he doesn't endorse candidates, I think he's doing what he can to let people read between the lines. So when asked if he was surprised that Trump was treated for COVID-19, Fauci answered, absolutely not. Quote, I was worried that he was going to get sick when I saw him in a completely precarious situation of crowded, no separation between people, almost nobody wearing a mask. He's referring to the Rose Garden debut of the next justice of the Supreme Court. Boy, that was hard to say. He went on, when I saw that on TV, I said, oh, my goodness, nothing good can come out of that. That's got to be a problem. And then sure enough, it turned out to be a super spreader event. So even before this, Trump had taken a swipe at Fauci because during we had this short baseball season. So in the middle of the summer, the season began, and Fauci was asked to throw out the first pitch at the Washington Nationals game in D.C. And, he's not an athlete. So Trump took a swipe at him. And has Trump ever thrown out a first pitch? I know he was asked to, but I think he ducked it. Anyway, this is one of those petty little snarky attacks. And Trump said Tony's pitching arm is far more accurate than his prognostications. So Fauci also told 60 Minutes that the White House did limit his media appearances. He said, I certainly have not been allowed to go on many, many, many shows that have asked for me. And then today, Trump, in a phone call, I guess he spent the night in Las Vegas partying with Sheldon Adelson. And he was on a conference call with his campaign team. He loves them all. And I guess to pay back for the 60 Minutes comments, Trump told the team, people are tired of listening to Fauci and these idiots, and yet we keep him. Every day he goes on television, there's always a bomb, but there's a bigger bomb if you fire him. But Fauci is a, you know the next word, disaster. Oh, and Trump added he's been there for 500 years. So today in Utah, 21 white supremacists were charged by the U.S. Attorney's Office for selling and distributing meth and illegal firearms. They unsealed the charges of 15 different indictments late on Friday, detailing the results of a 16-month investigation that involved several local and federal agencies. And the charges include that they were in league with a white supremacist gang that included members in Texas, Mississippi, and Kentucky. So there are three groups involved here: the Soldiers of Aryan Culture, the Silent Aryan Warriors, and what's described as a new white extremist armed group, the Noble Elect Thugs, or NET. And they allegedly trafficked meth and firearms around Salt Lake City and Ogden. The U.S. Attorney John Huber said many of the gang members were documented, had lengthy criminal records. Unfortunately, he said, this is a Utah product. White supremacy gangs, we own it, and we aren't proud of it. And this comes just 2 days after 24 other alleged white supremacists across 3 states were indicted on charges of racketeering, conspiracy, violent crimes in aid of racketeering, drug conspiracy, and unlawful firearms trafficking. And in a kind of big picture overview, The Guardian today published a piece, and I've linked to it in the show file for today's podcast, that the FBI and the Justice Department are finally cracking down on white supremacist and paramilitary groups. And, of course, we know about the Michigan gang, the Wolverines. And the article says last year was the deadliest on record for domestic extremist violence since the Oklahoma City bombing of 1995. White supremacists were responsible for most of that bloodshed in 2019, 39 of 48 deaths, including 23 people who died at the hands of the anti-Hispanic racist at the Walmart in El Paso. And they quote Vanda Felbab Brown, a terrorism and extremist expert at the Brookings Institute. The threat is serious and intense. It is by far the most serious domestic danger in the U.S. on many levels. The frequency of attacks, the level of recruitment, the scope of ambition of the groups, and the wider political capital that they are building. The article continues, agitators have seized the dual opportunities of the coronavirus pandemic and the Black Lives Matter protests to come out of the shadows and onto the streets. Even before the start of the pandemic, they were flexing their muscles. And Felbab Brown recalls attending a gun rally in Richmond, Virginia, this past January that attracted thousands of extremists carrying semi-automatic assault rifles. There were militia members from all across the U.S., Trump supporters with guns, gun rights supporters, all mixing together in large crowds. They drew energy from each other, enlarged their networks, and emboldened their thinking. And the article quotes Michael German, the former FBI agent who was interviewed on this podcast earlier this year. He's at the Brennan Center for Justice, and back in the 1990s, he was an undercover FBI agent who infiltrated white supremacists and militia groups. And he says, now they feel sanction, referring to Trump's racist appeals. They think my violence is no longer criminal. It's allowed. It's what the president wants us to do. German says he is skeptical that the FBI and Homeland Security are serious about taking on the threat. He said, I want to see it in data. I want to see the arrests, the investigations. I want to know what the FBI is actually doing. I suspect the data would show that there have been a lot of deaths caused by white supremacists, but disproportionately few investigations. Now we turn to the state of play of the election process in this country, and it is shaping up to be just an all-out chaotic mess. We have a letter from Greg Palast to the Secretary of State of Georgia, Brad Raffensperger, where he says that Raffensperger is withholding the list of over 198,000 voters that he and his predecessor Brian Kemp wrongly purged from the voting lists in Georgia. And Palast refers to an ACLU report just about a month and a half ago called Georgia Voter Poll Purge Errors. And he addresses the Secretary of State, quote, you've had the ACLU's notification of this horrific violation of voters' rights for over a month, yet your office has chosen to dodge, weave, obfuscate, and prevaricate instead of acting to protect these Georgia citizens. Your office over the past 6 years has conducted a virtual ethnic cleansing of the voter rolls, capturing victims such as infamously Martin Luther King Jr.'s elderly cousin. You've wrongfully denied the right to vote on the false accusation they had moved from their registration county. King's cousin, like over 198,000 others, was still living in the home. You said she had left. And Pallas continues, we're going to make this easy for you. Our nonpartisan, not-for-profit fund will arrange, if you're sincerely concerned about correcting these errors, for the U.S. Postal Service's official licensee, Merkel Incorporated, to contract with your office to obtain the correct list of those who've moved. We will also provide you the massive deep files of the nation's leading address hygiene experts. And Pallas goes on. The Pallas Fund will pay for your postal license and the experts to guide you. This can be done in hours if you are sincere in reversing this wrong against voters. Our investigation also determined you wrongly claimed you used the official Postal Service licensee. In fact, you used a tiny company that clearly had the wrong unlawful list. But it appears you are happy with the erroneous list because it removed so many voters not favorable to your party. So this is quite it's throwing down the gauntlet. And we're scheduled to interview Greg Palast this Friday. So we may have a developing story there from Georgia when we talk to Greg later this week. He also warns that today is the last day to register online in Michigan. And I point that out to those of you who might hear this podcast before it's too late. And I will take a little swipe at you for waiting until the final day. I mean, these elections are known well in advance. So the New York Times did a service today and published a detailed article identifying the 7 states that are likely to have the biggest problems getting the votes, counting the votes, and issuing a timely certified result. So they ranked them, the top 7 or the bottom 7, I'm not sure which way you want to refer to it. Out of the 7, they're saying Arizona, of all the battleground states, is expected to have a smooth election. The law was changed to allow the absentee ballots to be counted beginning 14 days before Election Day, so we might have a meaningful result from Arizona on election night. Then they go to Michigan. Michigan has had a successful poll worker recruitment program with more than 30,000 people signing up and no regional restrictions preventing them from going anywhere in the state. That's because of COVID. They go on to say that Michigan law allows the election offices to start counting absentee ballots only the night before, 10 hours before Election Day. So Michigan is predicting that they will have results by Friday, November 6th. But, of course, the Postal Service could intervene negatively there. Next, they look at Wisconsin, which the Republican legislature has created a series of hurdles, including one of the nation's strictest voter ID mandates. They're also, they require on mail-in ballots that a witness sign the ballot. So they're saying that Wisconsin, unlike most states, doesn't have a single office responsible for voting statewide, nor do county officials oversee the elections. Instead, more than 1,800 municipalities manage their own elections. What a mess. In scores of rural townships, a part-time town clerk is responsible for conducting elections and counting the votes. And the clerks are forbidden from feeding the ballots through the counting machines until the polls open on the morning of November 3rd. So you see these various challenges that election officials face in trying to give us timely results. Next, number 4 of the 7 is Florida, and I have this alert that came in from Brad Friedman just a half hour ago. Orange County's elections office website was down this morning, Monday morning, on the very first day of early voting for the November 3rd election. Election supervisor Bill Cowell said the problem was because of an issue with the vendor, and he was quick to dismiss any notion that there had been a breach or a crash. Quote, "The website was not hacked. It didn't crash because of overload." He said it'll be fixed shortly, and apparently it was back online 3 or 4 hours after the crash or failure occurred. In the bigger picture, in Broward County, Florida, they are scrambling because the vendor that his office had hired to pick up and drop off voting equipment to the polls has for some reason canceled the county's order. So he's calling U-Haul and Ryder. It's one of the myriad challenges faced by the 67 county supervisors in Florida. More than 2.4 million ballots in Florida had already been returned as of Sunday afternoon. And so far, 400,000 more Democrats have returned mail ballots than Republicans. And in the state of Florida, they are allowed to remove from the mail-in ballots from their envelopes, verify signatures, and tabulate the vote on the day that they arrive. So Florida may have a meaningful result on election night. Then North Carolina, where there are already 500,000 absentee ballots returned and being processed, but 2 court decisions threaten to disrupt the elections. In one, the state Republican Party is pushing to be allowed to send partisan inspectors into the county boards of elections before absentee ballots are approved. In the second case, the state is keeping at least 7,000 absentee ballots with potential issues in limbo while a court sorts through a legal challenge on whether the voter should be allowed to cure the defects in their ballots. Then we go to Georgia. And as Greg Palast tipped you off, Georgia is the epicenter of voting suppression. And even the New York Times says no state had a worse voting experience in the 2020 election primaries than Georgia. Absentee ballots either failed to arrive on time or showed up damaged. Poll workers, scared by the virus, bailed at the last minute, forcing the consolidation of thousands of voters into a single location in Atlanta. Lines stretched for hours, some voters not able to cast ballots until 1 a.m., and sometimes the state's new voting machines malfunctioned. I think that's an understatement. By Sunday, more than 1.4 million Georgians had voted. That's more than 34% of the total turnout in 2016. And delays for voters continue. Oh, and then there's Pennsylvania. Few states are still facing more litigation-driven uncertainty than Pennsylvania. The state has had its plans to install drop boxes hung up by the courts for months. According to a professor of political science at MIT, Charles Stewart III, Pennsylvania is the one everyone is worried about. So more than 2.7 million mail-in ballots have been requested. About just under 700,000 have been returned so far, so that's roughly 2 million outstanding. Election officials cannot touch the ballots until Election Day. So this is another case where we won't know right away. We'll have the count from the polls, and we'll have a partial count of the mail-in ballots, probably those received before Election Day itself. And in a separate article at the Washington Post, problems already cropping up in Pennsylvania with voter registration. College students in at least 3 counties in Pennsylvania who attempted to register to vote online had their applications rejected. They're notified that they must provide documentation in person or by mail. And it's already too late here on Monday as I speak for that to occur. The deadline has passed. Meanwhile, other voters are receiving rejection notice for their absentee ballot requests without clear explanation. Trump is getting a payback for his investment in conservative, young, white judges on the nation's appeals court benches. And this has been the mania of Mitch McConnell to confirm as many of these. There are over 200. And the New York Times pointed out on Sunday on a front-page article that a case they cite in Texas is one of at least 8 major election disputes where federal district court judges are being overruled by federal appeals courts populated by Trump appointees. In appointing dozens of reliable conservatives to the appellate bench, Trump has made it more likely that appeals coming before judges with legal philosophies sympathetic to him will cause them to rule in his favor. And this year there's been a dizzying 350 or more cases of election-related litigation. And we've seen a number of cases where Trump-appointed judges have made sure that they deliver for the stable genius. Well, Americans on the left side of the spectrum apparently are not impoverished by the COVID lockdown and the economic slowdown, because in the last quarter, July 1 to September 30th, Act Blue, which is the central clearinghouse for Democratic political contributions, processed more than $1.5 billion. And let me just run this down to you. These are obscene amounts of money. Mark Kelly, the astronaut running in Arizona, raised $38 million in that quarter. His opponent raised $22.6. In the race to unseat Mitch McConnell, which I don't consider likely, Amy McGrath has raised $37 million this quarter, and Mitch a paltry $15 million. In Maine, Democratic challenger Sarah Gideon, who's polling slightly ahead of Susan Collins, raised almost $40 million in the past quarter, and Susan Collins only $8.3 million. The guy who's trying to defeat Lindsey Graham, Jamie Harrison, you've heard about him. He's raised $57 million, and he keeps dinging me on Facebook asking for more money. No, Jamie, just win the damn election, okay? You don't even have a place to spend it. Lindsey Graham raised a little under $30 million in the same quarter. Then there's Teresa Greenfield, who is polling ahead of Joni Ernst, and she raised $28 million in this quarter. And the Iowa one-termer has she raised $7.2 million. Then in Georgia, Democrat John Ossoff, who I think has personal wealth but also is a skilled fundraiser, he picked up $21 million in the past quarter. He's running against David Perdue, and he has only raised $5.6 million, so about a quarter of Ossoff. Even in Montana, Governor Steve Bullock raised $27 million this quarter, and that's a place where it's hard to spend that kind of money. I mean, he could buy dinner for almost everybody across the state. And his Republican opponent, Steve Daines, raised less than half that, about $11.5 million. And even the tainted Cal Cunningham in North Carolina, in trouble for his sexual tweets with a presumed mistress, he raised $28 million, and Tom Tillis raised $6.6 million. And then there's this woman, Barbara Bollier, in Kansas. She was a Republican 6 months ago. She raised $13.5 million. Her Republican opponent, less than $3 million. So even a loser like Doug Jones in Alabama was able to raise $10 million, and Tommy Tuberville got a little under $8 million. So the Democrats are winning in the money race. But it's pretty obscene. And you can be, if you want to dig into these fundraising reports, there are online portals where you can go. And I think you'll see that it's not $27 contributions coming in like the way Bernie Sanders raised his money. So it's the Russians again in a coordinated media offensive. The Justice Department here in the United States announced indictments of 6 Russian military intelligence officers. It doesn't have anything to do with 2016. It doesn't have anything to do with 2020. They are accusing members of the GRU, Unit 74455, that's Fancy Bear to you and me, of attacking the 2017 French presidential elections, the British authorities investigating the alleged Novichok poisoning of the Skripals, the 2018 Winter Olympics in South Korea, and hacking the Ukrainian parliament. There's no date given on the Ukraine operation. But I think this is just more smoke to get people worked up about Russians, and we're told that Russia had a hand in the Joe Biden, Hunter Biden laptop computer story. And I'm sorry, I'm not buying it until somebody shows me some proof. And just to make this international, the UK National Cybersecurity Centre announced a similar messaging initiative today, claiming that Russian military intelligence services were planning a cyber attack on the postponed Japanese-hosted Olympics and Paralympics in Tokyo this past summer. The new evidence, this is called evidence? Oh, man. I'm reading from The Guardian, and on these issues, they suck. The new evidence is the first indication that Russia was prepared to go as far as disrupt the Summer Games, from which all Russian competitors have been excluded because of persistent state-sponsored doping offenses. So I'm not exonerating Russia. I'm not saying they don't hack. But I'm saying that we've got to put this bullshit to rest. We have active interference in our elections by all kinds of operatives in the United States, including the Republican lawyer and the boatloads of money that Trump paid to lawyers to create these fake lawsuits anyway to, encourage a lack of confidence in the process on the part of American voters. And we're told this is what Russia's doing when we see right in front of our faces that Americans are doing it. And I don't dismiss that Russia might, be amplifying things or working on the margins. But the central players are right here in the U.S. of A. Let's go to Caitlin Johnstone, all the way from Australia. Let me quote her open from today's column. Fight it all you want, but there's nothing you can do. The emails are Russian is going to be the official dominant narrative in mainstream political discourse, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. Resistance is futile, she says. Like the Russian hacking narrative, the Trump-Russia collusion narrative, the Russian bounties in Afghanistan narrative, and any other evidence-free framing of events that simultaneously advances pre-planned Cold War agendas, is politically convenient for the Democratic Party and generates clicks and ratings. The narrative that the New York Post publication of Hunter Biden's emails is a Russian operation is going to be hammered and hammered and hammered until it becomes the mainstream consensus. And she says this will happen regardless of facts and evidence, up to and including rock-solid evidence that Hunter Biden's emails were not published as a result of a Russian operation. It's happening. It's following the same formula all the other fact-free Russia hysteria narratives have followed. The same media tour by pundits and political operatives saying with no evidence but with very assertive voices that Russia is most certainly behind this occurrence and we should all be very upset about it. And she cites tweets from James Clapper and Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut, Chris Hayes of MSNBC, Neera Tanden, the tainted spokeswoman from the Center for American Progress. Back to Johnstone. Virtually the entirety of the Democratic Party-aligned political media class has streamlined this narrative of Russian influence into the American consciousness with very little inertia, despite the fact that neither Joe nor Hunter Biden has disputed the authenticity of the emails and despite a complete absence of evidence for Russian involvement in their publication. Johnstone says in 2020 what's changed is that mainstream media reporters are now largely coalesced along the doctrine that they must avoid any reporting which might be detrimental to the Biden campaign. She quotes Glenn Greenwald. Democratic Party hacks and many of their media allies genuinely believe it's immoral to report on or even discuss stories that reflect poorly on Biden. In reality, it's the responsibility of journalists to ignore their vapid whining and ask about newsworthy stories, even about Biden. The latest Facebook friend to be bounced from the platform is Rudy Giuliani's friend, Andrei Derkach. And he has been booted from Facebook for, quote, violating our policy against the use of our platform by people engaged in election-focused influence operations. Now, that is actually probably true. But Andrei Derkach released a heavily edited audio track of a phone call between Biden and Petro Poroshenko. I believe it was in June. And so, Facebook, why did it take you so long? Why did you suddenly decide here, with 15 days to go till the election, that Derkach has to be removed? Well, a spokesperson said, we removed this account and this page for violating our policy against the use of our platform by people engaged in election-focused influence operations. And he's the only one? So my point is that once again, we have these arbitrary and inconsistent actions by Facebook. And the timing, again, is just bizarre. Because we've known about this guy for ages. He's in cahoots with Rudy Giuliani. But has Giuliani been banned from Facebook? Not to my knowledge. Not even suspended. Not even for a minute. And also, Twitter locked out the account of the White House so-called coronavirus advisor, Dr. Scott Atlas. Now, I don't agree with this guy about much. But to the extent that he is offering a point of view against the use of face coverings, masks, by Americans, I believe he is entitled to do that. But Twitter has determined that this is flatly false. And I do think, as we'll discuss a little bit later in our COVID report, that people deserve to hear any opinions about COVID, about mask wearing, and they get to decide for themselves. We'll come back to that. Meanwhile, Mother Jones magazine, based here in San Francisco, which lost a lot of its credibility with me because it was a shameless promoter of the Russiagate narrative, they're now attacking Facebook for throttling back the distribution of Mother Jones articles to Facebook users. Clara Jeffrey, who's a very nice woman, said that this has cost Mother Jones almost $600,000 a year in lost revenue. She says she's enraged after reading a Wall Street Journal report about how Mark Zuckerberg has drifted away from his apolitical stance and become a seriously involved player. She says, I'm enraged. This is a tweet from Clara. Excellent reporting from Wall Street Journal's reporters finds that Facebook engineers, with sign-off from Zuck, retooled their algorithm to throttle traffic to high-value progressive news organizations. Now, internal reporting from Facebook indicates that they were really targeting the Daily Wire, which is this right-wing news site. But they basically just wrote the code to reduce traffic to many reputable left-leaning or independent media outlets. So another tweet from Jeffrey. She says, and they directly lied to our social media team. Facebook is a garbage company. You work there, you're complicit in the Pandora's box of shit they've let loose in the world. Oh, and by the way, Ben Shapiro, who is the right-wing radio host who also is co-founder of the Daily Wire, he scored an invitation and actually went to dinner at Mark Zuckerberg's home in San Francisco. And in one of her angry tweets, Clara Jeffrey said, "What, WTF, seriously? Guess who's not invited to dinner? Hey, Mark, I live only a few blocks from you." So Ajit Pai is the much-derided chair of the Federal Communications Commission. He was an executive at Verizon before Trump moved him in there. And to pacify his dear leader and dear tweeter, he has announced that he is going to engage in a rulemaking action to clarify the meaning of Section 230. And this is the one that distinguishes a media platform from being a publisher. And as you know, I believe that while it is inconvenient for social media like Twitter and Facebook to be labeled as publishers, when they censor messages people post, they're making editorial decisions. They are, in fact, publishers. But they want to have it both ways. And let me correct a point I made earlier. It was Barack Obama who appointed Ajit Pai to the FCC. I misstated that Trump had been the president who did that. At any rate, Pai, of course, dismantled net neutrality, and he wants to reinterpret this Section 230 to make social media companies liable for the content on their platforms. And I don't think that he is a neutral player. I don't think the FCC actually has jurisdiction over these social media platforms. So I believe this is purely political. Well, there's good news from Bolivia. Almost a year after the U.S.-backed coup that took out Evo Morales, his Movimiento al Socialismo, the MAS party, has secured more than 50% of the vote, and Luis Arce, or Arce, A-R-C-E is his name. He is the winning candidate. His opponent has conceded, and even the interim coup president, Janine Áñez, has conceded that the MAS party is victorious, and she tweeted her congratulations to the winner. And I want to recommend that you read Glenn Greenwald's report today on the Bolivian election because he offers some important context and the way that Evo Morales was removed with U.S. complicity just about a year ago, leading to a reign of terror by the right wing against the Workers' Party that was championed by Evo Morales and his almost 10 years in office as the leader of Bolivia. So I think it's a strong piece that will give you a little background and context if that's something you're looking for. Here's today's COVID-19 update edited by Linda Lewis. Case numbers in the U.S. are rising rapidly as states in the Midwest and Rocky Mountains struggle to control major outbreaks. The top 5 states remain North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, Wisconsin, and Nebraska. In the U.S., we are reporting 53,000 new cases today, and we've been averaging above 50,000 over the past 2 weeks almost. We are now showing 218,511 deaths, 593 of those reported for Sunday. And coronavirus hospitalizations are increasing in 39 states and are at or near their all-time peak in 16 states. 39 states saw an increase over the past 2 weeks in the percentage of available, of occupied hospital beds with coronavirus patients. 9.4% of the beds in Wisconsin are COVID occupied. 16 states are at or near the highest hospitalization rates. And these numbers, combined with a nationwide surge in new infections, confirm that the pandemic is getting worse, just as cold weather begins to set in, driving more people indoors for larger lengths of time. And Linda has located a new website called covidexitstrategy.org. She describes it as a nonpartisan group of public health and crisis experts who worked across multiple administrations. They've now created a website to track each state's progress towards stopping the spread of COVID-19. And Linda notes about half of the listed collaborators are associated with the U.S. Digital Response, which says it connects experienced volunteer technologists with public servants and organizations responding to crisis. So I have linked to the new website in the show file for this podcast, and you can click on that to get more information. Their charts include How is my state doing on key measures? How is the disease spreading? Can our health system handle the spread? And how is my state doing on testing? So now we come to Dr. Scott Atlas. He's this guy from Stanford who has no background in communicable disease or pandemics. But he was on Fox News, and Trump thought, I like what this guy's saying. So he essentially has displaced Dr. Birx and Tony Fauci as the lead advisors to the White House. So Michael Osterholm, who I believe is from the University of Minnesota, was on Meet the Press yesterday, and he commented on a report from White House advisor Scott Atlas referencing a theory that only 20 or 25% of people need the infection for the rest of the population to be protected. And Osterholm said, first of all, that 20% number is the most amazing combination of pixie dust and pseudoscience I've ever seen. The number is 50% to 70% at minimum. And remember, when we talk about getting to 50 to 70% protection, we're talking that you can get there with disease. But if that happens, there will be a lot of deaths, a lot of serious illness. Or we can try to get there with vaccination and postponing the number of people who get sick until we have vaccines available. 50 to 70% just slows down transmission. It doesn't stop it. So this virus is going to keep looking for wood to burn for as long as it can. So our goal is to get as many people protected with vaccines. And Osterholm warned that the U.S. is likely to blow right through its July peak in infections with case numbers much larger than 75,000 per day as the country barrels toward a very dark fall. And in a moment, we'll talk about Scott Atlas and masks. The Latin Times is reporting that California-based biotech company and COVID-19 vaccine developer Vaxart is under federal investigation for allegedly exaggerating its role and involvement in Operation Warp Speed. Vaxart, which is working on a vaccine, recently became subject to federal investigation after several investors started suing the pharma company for exaggerating its involvement and role in the program. According to reports, the company stated in June that Vaxart's COVID-19 vaccine selected for the U.S. government's Warp Speed, that's a headline. Immediately after the statement was released, the stock went up from $3 to $17. And a hedge fund called Armistice Capital that partly controlled the company sold its shares for a profit of more than $200 million. So that shows that profiteering on the path to a vaccine is alive and well. And Linda says, finally, this one's for you, Peter, and thank you. The AP reports that many ski resorts have consulted with state and local health agencies and are making preparations to reopen this winter. Skiers should be prepared for some changes, like wearing masks. Well, I often do because it's cold. Standing a ski length apart, riding lifts only with your own group, and no après-ski large gatherings. And Dave Bird from the National Ski Areas Association says we're very optimistic about skiing this winter. Well, the only problem is we have a La Nina weather pattern that is likely to produce far less snow. But I do look forward to getting some skiing in without the responsibility for a daily podcast here. Airports have screened more than 1 million travelers in the first time since mid-March, but I'm trying to find out. Oh, that's one day. 1 million people passed through airport checkpoints on Sunday. Well, that is an indicator that people have more confidence in flying. There was a study released last week by the airlines, and so I can't say that I fully trust it, that said that they hadn't found a single case of transmission of COVID on a domestic flight here in the United States. I'll hang back a little more if you don't mind. The World Health Organization conducted a study of 11,000 people in 30 countries and concluded that remdesivir does not help prevent deaths or speed recovery of people who have been diagnosed with COVID-19. and they report the same findings for hydroxychloroquine. Now, some experts are challenging this. It hasn't yet been peer-reviewed. The standards are different in the 30 different countries, but I think you deserve to know that. There's a lengthy expose in today's Washington Post about Scott Atlas and how he has poisoned the atmosphere at the White House and on the coronavirus task force, which is nominally run by the vice president. Atlas shot down attempts to expand testing, the article says. He openly feuded with other doctors on the task force. He advanced fringe theories like social distancing and mask wearing were meaningless and would not have changed the course of the virus. He advocated allowing infections to spread naturally to develop herd immunity. So I reiterate that I don't support Scott Atlas. I do support his right to go on the Twitter and say whatever he wants. Now, I believe that people are entitled to hear what he has to say. There are people who find him credible. I just don't happen to be one of them. So it's a worthwhile piece. I've linked to it in the show file for today's podcast. It's based on 41 interviews with administration officials, and you will not be surprised that they find that the task force is confused, it's in disarray, it's been politicized, and they know that they are not effectively dealing with the problems. So Mark Crispin Miller is a longtime ally. He teaches media at New York University, and he conducts News from Underground, which is a daily news feed. And I have to say that I do not agree with my friend, Professor Miller, who just dismisses masks with a passion. And I consider him to be biased. He's written a 125-page article, I would call it, about the issue. He does cite some scientific studies that claim that wearing face masks does not reduce transmission of respiratory viruses. And in an email today, he pits Jeremy Hammond against Ben Swann. He calls both of them excellent. But Hammond does a great job of dismantling a recent video from Ben Swann, who, according to the analysis by Hammond here, and I tend to agree with it, got it completely wrong. And he took this study, and Trump tried to trot it out in the town hall meeting last week. And the bottom line from Hammond here is that mask wearers and non-mask wearers have an approximately equal chance of testing positive for COVID-19. And as I say, I believe people should be able to openly discuss these issues. I don't think that I am some sort of an oracle who has a corner on what is true and what isn't. And I freely acknowledge my lack of scientific background. I feel that people have gone to extremes. And my fundamental belief is that when I wear a mask and I sneeze or cough, it catches my output and keeps those particles, those aerosols, from going as far as they would have if I didn't have a mask on. I don't believe that it protects me from ingesting the virus to any great degree. And I also think that to the extent that it involves social control, that getting people to wear masks is a way of reminding us all every day that we're in the middle of a freaking pandemic. And it's a wily virus that often defies what we think it should do or will do. And I don't want to be the guy who gets sick because I arrogantly believe that I don't need to wear a mask. And finally today, I want to just declare that I've had enough. Because, let me preface this, I think that there are some place names and public statues in the United States that are offensive to some people. And I believe that local voters have a right to change names, to take down statues, to put up statues. and my opinion is not needed for local people to make those decisions. But here in San Francisco, they put together a panel to evaluate the names of the 44 public schools in the city and county of San Francisco. And that committee last week returned a report suggesting that as many as 44 of those schools should be prepared to change their names. Well, for example, there is a Dianne Feinstein Elementary School, and especially after her mask-free hug of Lindsey Graham at the conclusion of the Barrett hearings last week, and "way to go, Lindsey" comments, I'm not fond of Dianne Feinstein. But the reason they say they got to take her name off this school is when she was mayor of San Francisco in 1984, she allowed a Confederate flag to fly outside City Hall for one day after protesters took it down. It was part of a display of a whole range of American flags. We did not have the same sensitivity at that time about Confederate flags, and when a black member of the Board of Supervisors complained, Feinstein had it removed within 24 hours. Now, despite my political opposition to Dianne Feinstein, the only time I worked on a major campaign for a Republican was when I supported Tom Campbell, who ran against her in 2000. But she is a respected figure in San Francisco. She served as mayor. She's been senator for way too long. But to say because of one incident involving a Confederate flag, they got to take her name off a school? All right, here's one more. The James Lick Middle School. He was a 19th century philanthropist, and his estate, after he died, sponsored the creation of what is described as the racist early days statue that was removed from the San Francisco Civic Center in 2018. The guy wasn't even alive when his heirs or his trustees decided to fund the creation of that statue. And as a result, his name has to be removed, and he is going to be consigned to the trash bin of history? I'm sorry. This reaches the level of ludicrousness. There are much bigger fish to fry. There are much more important battles to wage. Please, give me a fucking break. Thanks for listening to my ranting and raving and my F-bombs today. You're free to share it all over the place. You'll find it on YouTube. I'm Peter B.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails.